UFC 300 right around the corner next weekend. I'm still pretty underwhelmed at what we're getting for a number of reasons. Hear me out. I know I already made one of these videos, but now I'm going to try to work with the fighters I have within the roster of the main card to change it, and only allowed to change a maximum of 3 fighters to make this the best card possible and set up future cards. Let me know in the comments if you like what I did or if you didn't. Let's hear it. Here are my gripes and concerns for the current UFC card and how I fix it. We're going to restructure it. I'm a huge Bo Nickel fan, but I don't appreciate him fighting over the likes of Yuri Prohaska and Aljamain Sterling, who literally were just champion less than a year ago. It feels very forced and like they're trying to make him a star rather than let it happen organically. The BMF belt, while I do think Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway are going to put on a war, I don't appreciate the fact that the UFC is derailing both the featherweight and lightweight divisions by taking out the number one contenders for what could be months at a time, maybe even a year, because if it's going to be as bloody as we think. Both these guys could give the champions in those divisions a great challenge that I would love to see. And also the upcoming cards, I think that we're already seeing this in UFC 301. It's looking pretty lame in my opinion. So let's see if I can make a few tweaks to help increase the ability of the next upcoming cards as well. Let's get into it. All right, we got the first fight of the night being Max Holloway versus Aljamain Sterling. I think this is the fight to make, not Holloway versus Gaethje. As entertaining as it will be, it does nothing for either division. Like, if Holloway wins, what is he going to bump up and fight Islam at 155? That just doesn't make any sense. And Gaethje, same thing. You need to give him the title fight against Islam. So therefore, by having Sterling fight Holloway, it's now introducing a new fighter fresh into the featherweight division, because we've seen Holloway piece up everybody in that division. He practically owned it aside from Volkanovski. I think this would be an incredibly entertaining fight. Holloway always puts on a war, and it would do a lot for the featherweight division, announcing a new number one contender to fight Ilia Topuria later this summer or this fall. For the second fight of the night, you got Prohaska versus Hill, another number one contender, and another fight that will help move the division along rather than stagnate it, which is what's happening with the current UFC card. So I know Jamal Hill is the main event for UFC 300, but I'm just not entirely sure if he's UFC main event capacity or it has the ability to challenge Pereira as much as people think he will. Maybe he'll prove me wrong, and that'd be fantastic if he did. I'm not hating on him. I think he's a great fighter. But I think Prohaska versus Hill makes more sense given Prohaska's awkward striking style and then Jamal Hill's power punch and slug it out ability. Again, this would be an awesome fight. The winner would move up to fight a Pereira after he's done with this UFC. And then the loser would fight Ankalaev or someone to see who would stay relevant within the top of that division. Now, the third fight of the night would be an absolute war in a battle for the belt of the BMF baddest motherfucker belt between Michael Chandler and Kamaru Usman. Now, I know Chandler doesn't usually fight at 170, and I know he's waiting for Conor McGregor. But with no Conor McGregor fight scheduled at this point, I think Chandler's wasting his best years, and before you know, he's going to be too old to compete. So I would love to see him get in the ring with Kamaru Usman. I think if you offered him UFC 300, he would take it because he's such a gladiator in the ring. And also, he walks around at 190, so him fighting at 170, I don't think is that out of the question. And to me, putting Kamaru Usman on this fight card just felt right. It felt wrong not to have him on UFC 300 when we're trying to celebrate the last few years of the UFC. I think Kamaru Usman has been an absolute staple in the UFC. And he's also done a lot, like fighting on 10 days' notice against Khamzat Chimaev and a weight class above. I think he's proved that he's a bad motherfucker, and both these guys would absolutely put on a show. And to me, this is what the BMF belt should be if we're going to have one. You're not going to take the number 1 or 2 contender in each division because then you're slowing down the division. Pick someone like Kamaru Usman, who's clearly not in title contention, but still has some fight left in him, and let's see him slug it out for the fans and put on a show, and maybe one of his last fights in UFC. Both these guys are over the age of 35. They're like 36, 37. So, and neither of them are in title contention, but I think they'd make for an awesome fight, and this is the type of thing I think makes sense. If you didn't want to do Michael Chandler because of the weight or whatever, I think you could argue Kamaru Usman fighting up against someone like Sean Strickland, or there's a lot of people. Nate Diaz came to mind. But the intention of the BMF belt to me is not taking someone who's in title contention and still giving them a reason why they should come back and fight. Let me know in the comments who you would have if in your BMF ideal fight. After the BMF title belt between Chandler and Usman at 170 for the third fight, we'd move into our fourth fight, being Zhang Weili, the Zhang Weili title fight. Now, originally, I wanted Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso for this fight. However, I'm trying not to mess with this card as little. I'm trying to mess with this card as little as possible, just to show better matchmaking. So I'm going to leave this as it is, and we're going to move into the main event. Now, I'm changing the main event to be Alex Pereira versus Tom Aspinall for the heavyweight title at 265. This is a UFC 300 level main event. You got Alex Pereira, who's an absolute giant. He walks around at like 243. I think he posted an Instagram story at 243, 244. So if you had given him enough time, a couple months, he absolutely could pack on some muscle and not have to cut any weight going into this card, which would be a huge advantage against Tom Aspinall. Another absolute animal in his division. I think he pieces up John Jones, and there's really no one in the heavyweight division to challenge him. I think both of these men, respectively, are incredibly dominant in their divisions, and there's really no one that poses a threat to either of them. So let's have them fight it out. And also, I think this is a lot for each division, giving them room to breathe in a couple months to establish a better pecking order, like establishing maybe a Cyril Gane versus Sergey Pavlovich heavyweight fight to see who will challenge Aspinall in the fall, as well as letting Yuri Prohaska, Jamal Hill, and Ankalaev, letting those guys figure out who's going to be the next title contender. And also, there's a huge win opportunity for Alex Pereira. If he beat Tom Aspinall, he would be the first ever man to win 3 different championship belts in 3 different weight classes in the UFC at UFC 300, which is an absolute incredible accomplishment. Easily put him as one of the GOATs of all time. And then for Tom Aspinall, and then, of course, if Alex Pereira loses, he has nothing to lose. He didn't lose his light heavyweight belt. And then Tom Aspinall, if he wins, it's a great name on his resume to show that he should fight John Jones next. Overall, my intent with these changes was to create absolute bangers of fights with guys like Holloway, Yuri Prohaska, Michael Chandler, Kamaru Usman, people who have been staples in the UFC the last few years, while also moving the divisions forward to create good title contenders for these new champions that we're getting. For example, the winner of Holloway and Sterling and the winner of Prohaska and Hill, those will all be title contenders, rather than the Gaethje-Holloway fight that does nothing for either division. And moving into my next point of what these changes will do for future cards. For example, why wouldn't you have Charles Oliveira as a headliner for UFC 301 that's literally in Brazil? He's the king of Brazil. He's absolutely a staple in that country, one of the biggest fighters. Why wouldn't you have him headline that card and thus bump up UFC 301, which at this point is looking pretty pathetic? I know people are excited for him versus Sarukian. However, I'm willing to wait a few weeks just to make UFC 301 that much better of a card. And also putting people like Diego Lopez and the Andrade fight. Those are all Brazilian fighters, both of those prelim events, that could easily be main events at UFC 301 in Brazil. I know they were exciting, people looking forward to them, but let's make UFC 301 just as good to help the momentum keep going. Moving into UFC 302, which absolutely should be Islam versus Gaethje. Again, Gaethje fighting in the BMF belt takes him out for months at a time. So who is Islam going to fight? Dustin Poirier? That sounds great, and I like Dustin Poirier. I think he would deserve a title shot. However, Gaethje just beat him recently, so Gaethje should be the one to fight for the title. I think poses the biggest threat to Islam. Then, of course, you have Leon. I'd love to see him fight Shavkat, but Bilal also is in line, so let's give one of them a shot. And then you have Dricus versus Adesanya. Again, I just think the biggest point I'm trying to drive across is we got to keep these champions active while they're here, or we're going to miss them when they're gone. I really think we took for granted the generation of champions like Alexander Volkanovski, Kamaru Usman, and I hate to say it, even Israel Adesanya. As much as I didn't always appreciate them at the time, I really missed their consistency and the amount of fights they would put out each year, and they just cleared their divisions, which we're not seeing in this new group of champions. Let me know in the comments what you thought of any of my changes and what you would like to see if you could work with what you got with the fighters that are currently fighting at UFC 300. How would you matchmake it? How would you matchmake fighters for the future? Thank you so much for listening. Please like and subscribe. Have a great day.